A werewolf romance written by Olivia Smith. Prologue. They called me cursed before they called me witch. The pack bound me to the pyre at dawn, and my own brother held the torch. I didn't beg. I'd learned long ago that begging only made them smile. But when the flames kissed my skin and I should have screamed, something ancient woke inside me instead. The fire didn't burn. It bowed. And from the smoke and ash, he came. The Lycan King. He didn't ask permission. He took me from the flames like I was something precious, something worth claiming, and when our eyes met, I saw my death transform into something far more dangerous. Destiny. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. What country are you in, and what time is it there right now? Morning, afternoon, or midnight? I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments, then let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The rope burned worse than I thought it would. Thick and coarse, it bit into my wrists as they bound me to the wooden stake, each knot pulled tight by hands that had once touched me gently. My brother Caspian worked the final rope around my ankles, his jaw set hard, his eyes refusing to meet mine. I wanted to hate him for his cowardice, but all I felt was the hollow ache of knowing he believed every lie they'd told about me. The morning air tasted like smoke already, though they hadn't lit the kindling yet. The entire Silverpaw pack had gathered in the clearing, a sea of faces I'd known my whole life, and not one of them looked away. They wanted to watch. They needed to see the cursed girl burn. My stepmother, Alara, stood at the front of the crowd, her face a mask of righteous fury, but I could see the satisfaction glittering in her pale eyes. She'd been waiting for this moment since my father died 3 years ago, since the protection of his love had turned to ash and left me vulnerable. She wore white, as if this were some holy ceremony, as if my death would cleanse the pack of whatever darkness she claimed I carried. "Arya Ashford," she announced, her voice ringing clear across the clearing. "You stand accused of witchcraft, of conspiring with dark forces, of bringing sickness and misfortune upon this pack. Do you confess?" I could have laughed if my throat wasn't so dry. Confess to what? Being born different? Having eyes that changed color with the moon? Surviving when her own daughter died of fever last winter? "I confess to nothing," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I felt. "Because I've done nothing." The murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through dead leaves. Alara's smile was thin and cold. "Your defiance only proves your guilt," she said. She gestured to the elder, Marcus, who stepped forward with a torch already burning in his gnarled hand. He'd blessed me as an infant. Now he wouldn't even look at my face. "The law is clear," Marcus intoned, his voice shaking with age, or maybe shame. "Witchcraft is punishable by fire. May the goddess have mercy on your soul." I wanted to close my eyes, to retreat somewhere inside myself where the fear couldn't reach, but I forced myself to watch. If I was going to die, I would die with my eyes open, bearing witness to every single person who'd chosen to murder me. Caspian took the torch from Marcus. My little brother, the boy I'd raised after our mother died giving birth to him, the child I'd sung to sleep and taught to shift and protected from Alara's cruelty whenever I could. His hand trembled as he approached the pyre, and for one desperate heartbeat, I thought he might refuse. "Caspian," I whispered, "please." His eyes met mine finally, and they were full of tears, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I'm sorry, Arya, but the pack must be protected." He dropped the torch into the kindling. The fire caught instantly, hungry and eager, racing through the dry wood with a sound like breathing. Heat slammed into me, and I couldn't stop the gasp that tore from my throat. This was it. This was how I died. But as the flames climbed higher, reaching for my skin with orange fingers, something stirred deep in my chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. A power I'd spent my whole life trying to suppress because it terrified me, because it made me different, because it was exactly what they'd accused me of. The fire touched my ankle, and I braced for the agony. Instead, the flames curved around me like water around stone. The crowd's jeers turned to shocked silence. Alara's face went white, and I realized with absolute clarity that everything was about to change. The fire wasn't killing me. It was bowing. Chapter 2. 3 months earlier, I'd been ordinary. Or at least, I'd been trying to be. I woke before dawn, like I always did, careful not to disturb Caspian, who slept in the corner of our small room in the pack house. The air was cold enough to see my breath, and frost had painted intricate patterns on the single window. Winter was coming early this year, and with it, the harvest moon ceremony, where unmated wolves would present themselves to potential mates. I was 22 and still unmated, which made me either cursed or unwanted depending on who you asked. My wolf had never fully emerged, never completed the transformation that should have come naturally at 16. I could feel her inside me, restless and frustrated, but she remained trapped beneath my skin like a bird in a cage. I dressed quickly in the dim light, pulling on the worn dress Alara had deemed appropriate for someone of my station. After my father's death, she'd made it clear that I existed in the pack house, on her charity alone. That every scrap of food I ate and every thread I wore was a gift I should be grateful for. I'd learned not to argue, learned to make myself small and useful and invisible. In the kitchen, I started the morning fire and began preparing breakfast for the pack's elite, Alara, her advisors, and the warriors who'd earned the privilege of eating in the main hall. My hands moved through the familiar motions automatically, grinding grain, measuring portions, checking the stores of dried meat and precious winter vegetables. The pack's food supplies were lower than they should be this close to winter. The summer hunt had been poor, and 2 of our best hunters had died in a border skirmish with a neighboring pack. Unease rippled through Silverpaw like a current beneath still water. "You're up early." The voice made me jump, and I turned to find Lyric watching me from the doorway. She was Alara's niece, newly arrived from the eastern packs, and everything I wasn't. Beautiful, confident, her wolf strong and her bloodline pure. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her amber eyes. "I wanted to help," she said, moving into the kitchen with the grace of someone who'd never been told she didn't belong. "Alara says I should learn the pack house routines." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Lyric had been kind to me since her arrival, but I'd learned to be wary of kindness. It so often came with conditions. "The bread needs kneading," I offered, gesturing to the dough I'd prepared. "If you'd like." She wrinkled her nose prettily. "Actually, I was hoping you could teach me about the herbs you use, for healing." My hands stilled. "I don't practice healing anymore," I said carefully. "Alara prefers the pack physician handle medical matters. But you know things," Lyric pressed, moving closer. "Old things. My mother told me your grandmother was a renowned healer, that she knew remedies the pack physicians have forgotten." Danger whispered down my spine. My grandmother had been more than a healer, and we both knew it. She'd been wise in the old ways, the practices that predated the pack systems, the knowledge that some called witchcraft. "That was a long time ago," I said firmly. "I only know basic remedies now, nothing special." Lyric studied me for a long moment, something calculating flickering behind her friendly expression. Then she smiled again and shrugged. "Well, if you change your mind, I'd love to learn. The harvest moon is only 3 weeks away, and I want to make a good impression." She paused in the doorway, glancing back at me. "You should come to the ceremony, Arya. You never know. Maybe this year your wolf will finally wake up." After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen with my hands trembling and that familiar fear coiling in my stomach. Because my wolf wasn't asleep. She was trapped, fighting against invisible chains I didn't understand, and lately, in my dreams, I'd started to hear her screaming. Chapter 3. The sickness started 3 days after Lyric and I spoke in the kitchen. Old Marta, who'd been the pack's head cook for 40 years, collapsed while preparing the evening meal. By nightfall, 2 more pack members had fallen ill with the same symptoms: fever, delirium, and a strange black discoloration spreading from their fingertips toward their hearts. The pack physician, a stern man named Aldrich, had no answers. I watched from the shadows as he examined Marta, his face growing graver with each passing moment. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted to Alara, who stood in the doorway of the sick room with her arms crossed. "It's not any natural illness I recognize." "Then it's unnatural," Alara said flatly. Her eyes found me in the corner where I'd been changing Marta's fever-soaked bedding, and something cold slithered across her expression. "Who has been handling the food preparation recently?" My heart stopped. "I prepare most meals," I said slowly, understanding dawning like ice water in my veins. "But I would never—" "Of course you wouldn't intentionally poison anyone," Alara interrupted, her voice honey-sweet and deadly. "But perhaps you used something in your cooking. Some herb or root that you thought was harmless. Your grandmother's remedies weren't always safe, were they?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Before I could defend myself, Lyric appeared in the doorway, her face pale and frightened. "Aunt Alara, you have to come quickly. 3 more have fallen ill." And they're all saying the same thing in their delirium. "What are they saying?" Alara demanded. Lyric's eyes found mine, and I saw something that looked almost like satisfaction flicker across her face before she answered. "They're saying they saw Arya in their dreams, that she was standing over them, whispering words in a language they didn't understand." The room went silent except for Marta's labored breathing. Every eye turned to me, and I saw my death in their gazes before anyone spoke a word. "I didn't," I whispered. "I would never harm anyone. These people are my family." "Your family?" Alara's voice cracked like a whip. "Your father's pack, perhaps. But you've never truly belonged here, have you, Arya? Always different. Always strange. Eyes that change color. A wolf that won't emerge. And now this." She gestured to Marta's prone form. "The old ways your grandmother practiced weren't just healing. They were witchcraft. And you've inherited her curse." I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I wanted to shift, to let my wolf tear free and prove I was pack, but she remained locked inside me. Useless. "Please," I said, hating the desperation in my voice. "Let me help find the real cause. Let me prove—" "You'll be confined to your room," Alara announced, "until we can determine the extent of your involvement." She nodded to 2 warriors who stood by the door. "Take her, and make sure she doesn't have access to any herbs or plants or whatever she's been using to poison this pack." They grabbed my arms, and I didn't resist. Fighting would only make it worse. As they dragged me from the sick room, I caught Caspian watching from the hallway. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw confusion and fear warring in his expression. "Caspian," I called to him. "You know me. You know I wouldn't—" But he turned away before I could finish, his shoulders hunched with shame or doubt, or both. In my room, alone with only the dying light through the frosted window, I finally let myself cry. Not for myself. I'd learned long ago that tears changed nothing. I cried for Marta, who'd always snuck me extra portions when Alara wasn't looking, for the pack members suffering from an illness I hadn't caused, but would be blamed for, and for the terrible certainty settling in my bones that this was only the beginning. Someone had poisoned those people, someone who wanted me to take the blame, and whoever it was had just sealed my fate. By morning, 2 more had fallen ill, and the whispers of witchcraft had turned to shouts for justice. They were coming for me. I could feel it in the air, in the way my wolf suddenly went still and silent inside me, as if she knew what I was too frightened to accept. I was going to die. Chapter 4. They came for me at dawn on the 7th day, when the death count had reached 5 and the surviving sick had grown too numerous to count. I'd spent 6 days locked in my room, listening to the pack's grief and rage build like a storm outside my door. Caspian had brought me meals, sliding them under the door without a word, refusing to answer when I begged him to talk to me. Now the door burst open, and Alara stood framed in the entrance with Marcus the Elder and a group of warriors behind her. "Arya Ashford," Marcus said, his voice heavy with sorrow that might have been genuine if I didn't know better. "You are summoned to stand trial before the pack for the crime of witchcraft and murder." They didn't give me time to prepare. or even change from my nightdress. The warriors hauled me into the great hall where the entire pack had gathered, their faces twisted with grief and hatred. I'd seen mobs before. We all had, when the pack dealt with rogues or traitors. But I'd never imagined being on the receiving end of that collective rage, feeling it press against my skin like a physical weight. They'd set up a crude courtroom, with Alara seated in my father's chair and Marcus standing beside her like some twisted parody of justice. I was forced to my knees in the center of the room, on the same floor where I'd played as a child, where my father had taught me to dance, where I'd laughed and loved and believed I was safe. "The evidence is clear," Alara announced, her voice ringing with false sorrow. "Arya Ashford has been practicing the dark arts, using her grandmother's forbidden knowledge to poison this pack. We have witness testimony." She gestured to Lyric, who stood to the side, looking appropriately horrified. "That she was asking about herbs and old remedies just days before the sickness began. We have the deathbed confessions of those who saw her in their fevered dreams, whispering curses. And we have the undeniable fact that she, alone among us, has been untouched by the illness." "Because I didn't cause it," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I'm immune because I haven't been exposed to whatever poison someone is actually using." Alara's smile was thin and cold. "Or because the witch is immune to her own curse." The crowd murmured agreement, and I felt hope crumbling inside my chest like old paper. This wasn't a trial. It was an execution dressed up in legal ceremony. "I want to speak," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Pack law says I have the right to defend myself." Marcus nodded reluctantly. "You may speak, though I doubt anything you say will change what we all know to be true." I stood on shaking legs, looking out at the faces I'd known my whole life. Some wouldn't meet my eyes. Others glared at me with open hatred. I found Caspian in the back, his face pale and stricken, and I directed my words to him. "I loved my father," I said quietly. "When he died, I thought grief would kill me. But I survived because I had Caspian to care for, because I had this pack that I believed would protect me the way my father always had." My voice grew stronger. "I spent 3 years making myself useful, trying to earn my place here. I cooked your food, tended your sick, mended your clothes. I asked for nothing except to be allowed to exist. And now you accuse me of murdering the very people I've spent my life serving?" I turned to Alara. "This sickness isn't my doing, but someone caused it, and that someone is standing in this room right now, letting me take the blame." Alara's face remained impassive, but I saw Lyric shift uncomfortably. "If you have evidence against another pack member, present it," Marcus said. "Otherwise, this defense is merely deflection." I had no evidence. I had only suspicion, and the terrible certainty that I was being framed. "I have nothing," I admitted, defeat tasting like ash in my mouth. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty of witchcraft. Guilty of murder. Guilty of crimes against the pack. The sentence was death by fire, as prescribed by ancient law for those who practiced dark magic. They would burn me at dawn. I was dragged back to my room, and this time Caspian followed. When the door closed behind the warriors, he stood there looking at me with tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Arya. I don't know what to believe anymore. Part of me knows you couldn't have done this, but everyone else is so certain. And the evidence—" "I didn't do it," I said, reaching for his hands. "Caspian, I swear on our father's memory, I didn't poison anyone." He pulled away from my touch as if it burned. "Then who did?" he demanded. "Who would do something so evil and let you take the blame?" I had no answer that wouldn't sound like madness. How could I explain the calculating look I'd seen in Lyric's eyes, the too convenient timing of her arrival, the way Alara had been waiting for any excuse to be rid of me? "I don't know," I said, "but I'm begging you to find out. After I'm gone, please investigate. Please don't let whoever really did this get away with it." Caspian backed toward the door, his face crumpling with anguish. "I'll hold your pyre torch," he said, and the words were like knives in my chest. "Alara says it's my duty as your brother to prove my loyalty to the pack. When he left, I sank to the floor and finally let the terror consume me. I was going to die tomorrow, burn alive while my own brother lit the flames, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Chapter 5. They came for me when the sun was just a pale promise on the horizon, the sky caught between night and day like the world itself was holding its breath. I'd spent the night pressed against the cold stone wall, trying to prepare myself for what was coming, trying to find some dignity to carry with me into death. But when the door opened and the warriors entered, I realized there was no preparing for this. No amount of courage could make peace with being burned alive. They dressed me in a white shift, the traditional garment for those condemned to die, and bound my hands in front of me with rope that smelled of pine and ash. No one spoke. Not even Alara, who watched from the doorway with an expression that was almost gentle, as if she were sending me off to some holy purpose instead of a brutal execution. The walk through the pack house felt endless and too short at the same time. I memorized every stone, every familiar corridor, every place where happiness had once existed. In the kitchen, I saw the table where Marta used to roll out dough while singing old pack songs. In the great hall, I saw the hearth where my father would tell stories on winter nights. All of it was ending, all those memories turning to ash before my body even touched the flames. Outside, the entire pack had gathered in the clearing where we held ceremonies and celebrations. But today there would be no celebration, only the grim satisfaction of justice served. The pyre stood in the center like a grotesque altar, wood stacked high and bound with kindling that would catch quickly. They'd built it well, efficient, meant to burn hot and fast. As they led me toward it, I scanned the crowd one last time, looking for something I couldn't name. Compassion? Doubt? Some sign that anyone believed I was innocent? But I found only hatred and fear and righteous anger. Except for Caspian, who stood at the front with the torch already burning in his hand, his face a mask of anguish that told me he'd already made his choice. They bound me to the stake with professional efficiency, ropes cutting into my skin as they secured me in place. I could smell the pitch they'd painted on the wood to make it burn hotter. Someone had planned this carefully, made sure there would be no chance of survival. I wondered if it was the same person who'd poisoned the pack and framed me for it. Alara approached the pyre, and the crowd fell silent. "Arya Ashford," she intoned, her voice carrying across the clearing, "you have been found guilty of witchcraft and murder. Have you any last words?" I could have begged, could have pleaded innocence one more time. But what was the point? They'd already decided my guilt, already built my pyre, already chosen my brother to light it. "I forgive you," I said instead, looking directly at Caspian. "All of you, because you don't understand what you're doing." Alara's smile was cold as winter. How noble. How predictable. She gestured to Caspian. "Carry out the sentence." My little brother walked toward me with the torch held in trembling hands, and I saw the exact moment he stopped being my Caspian and became the pack's executioner. Our eyes met one last time, and I saw him mouth the words, "I'm sorry." Then he dropped the torch into the kindling, and my world became fire. The flames caught instantly, racing up through the dry wood with a roar that sounded like breathing, like some great beast waking from sleep. Heat slammed into me, and I braced for the agony, for my skin to blister and my lungs to fill with smoke. But something impossible happened instead. The fire reached my feet, touched my skin, and instead of burning, it curved around me. The flames bowed. I stared down in shock as orange and gold flames caressed my legs without scorching, as the smoke swirled around me without choking. The crowd's anticipation turned to confused murmurs. Alara's face went white. And inside my chest, that power I'd spent my whole life suppressing suddenly roared to life like a caged animal finally breaking free. My wolf howled in triumph. The fire was mine. It had always been mine. And as the realization crashed through me, the flames grew brighter, hotter, reaching toward the sky like they were celebrating. I was the witch they'd accused me of being. I was the monster they'd tried to destroy. And now, bound to a pyre in front of my entire pack, my true nature was finally, terrifyingly revealed. The question was, would I burn with my secret, or would I let them see exactly what they'd tried to kill? Chapter 6. The fire climbed higher, hungry and wild, and I felt it respond to something deep inside me like a living thing recognizing its master. Power surged through my veins, hot and electric, nothing like the weak pull I'd always felt when trying to shift. This was different. Ancient. The flames spiraled around me in a cocoon of heat and light, but my skin remained unmarked. I could hear the crowd's shocked gasps, Alara's sharp intake of breath, the confused shouts asking what was happening. "Witchcraft!" Alara's voice cut through the chaos. "You see, she proves her guilt with her unnatural resistance." But I barely heard her. My wolf was rising inside me finally, after years of silence and stillness. I could feel her clawing toward the surface, desperate to break free. The transformation that should have come at 16 was happening now, here, in front of everyone. My bones began to shift. Not the smooth, practiced change of pack wolves, but something violent and primal that tore through me like a storm. I screamed, and the sound was half human, half animal, echoing across the clearing. The ropes binding me to the stake snapped like thread as my body contorted, growing larger, stronger. My vision sharpened, colors becoming almost painfully vivid. I could smell everything, the pack's fear, sharp and acrid, Alara's rage, like burning metal, the sickness still lingering on those who'd recovered, a sour, sweet wrongness that made my lip curl. And beneath it all, beneath the smoke and terror and confusion, I smelled something else, something wild and powerful and undeniably male, approaching fast from the forest. The transformation completed with a final, agonizing snap of my spine realigning. Where Arya had been, a wolf now stood. But not just any wolf. I was massive, easily twice the size of normal pack wolves, with fur the color of moonlight and eyes that burned gold like the flames still dancing around me. The crowd stumbled backward, some falling in their haste to get away. I heard screams, prayers, curses, but I only had eyes for Alara, who stared at me with a mixture of horror and something that looked almost like recognition. "Impossible," she whispered. "The bloodline was supposed to be dead. Your father swore." Before she could finish, the forest exploded with movement. Wolves poured into the clearing, but these weren't Silverpaw Pack. They were larger, darker, moving with military precision, and at their head ran a wolf that made even my transformed body look small. He was black as midnight with silver markings along his spine, and power radiated from him like heat from the sun. An alpha. No, more than that. Something in my newly awakened wolf soul recognized him instantly. Lycan King. The ancient bloodline. The rulers who predated pack systems, who'd once governed all wolfkind before the Great Fracturing. The massive black wolf stopped at the edge of the pyre, his silver eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Around us, chaos erupted. The Silverpaw warriors shifted to defend their territory, but the invading force was larger, better trained. Alara was shouting orders, trying to organize a defense, but her voice was drowned out by the sounds of battle. The Lycan King shifted, and I watched in awe as his wolf form melted into that of a man. He was tall, powerfully built, with black hair and those same piercing silver eyes. He wore the leather and furs of the Northern Territories, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. "Stand down," he commanded, and the words weren't directed at his own forces, but at the Silverpaw Pack. "This ceremony is over." Alara stepped forward, her face flushed with rage. "You have no authority here, Astwood. This is pack justice, sanctioned by ancient law." "Ancient law?" The king, Astwood, laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know nothing of ancient law. or you would never have dared touch her." His eyes found mine again, still in wolf form, still wreathed in flames that had somehow not consumed me. "She's a witch," Alara insisted. "A poisoner who's killed 5 of my pack members." "She's innocent," Astwood interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "And if you'd done your due diligence instead of rushing to murder, you would have discovered the real source of your pack's illness." He gestured, and one of his men dragged forward a figure I recognized. Lyric. She was bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. "We've been tracking a poison maker who's been targeting packs along the northern border," Astwood explained, "selling tainted herbs disguised as medicine. Your niece here was her accomplice, using the chaos to position herself as a potential mate to your strongest warriors, while eliminating any competition." I saw the truth click into place on Alara's face, saw her gaze dart between Lyric and me. "But the dreams," she said weakly. "The dying said they saw Arya." Suggestion and fever dreams, carefully planted. Astwood's voice was cold. "Your niece is gifted with minor mind manipulation. She used it to frame the girl while you were so eager to believe the worst that you never questioned the evidence." The fight had gone out of the Silverpaw warriors. They stood in confused clusters, looking between their leaders and the revelation unfolding before them. Astwood moved closer to my pyre, close enough that the flames should have burned him, but they parted for him the same way they'd parted for me. "Shift back," he said softly, speaking only to me. "Let me see you clearly." I wanted to, but I didn't know how. This transformation had been so violent, so complete, that I had no idea how to reverse it. Panic must have shown in my eyes, because Astwood's expression gentled. "I'll help you," he murmured. "Trust me." And then he reached into the flames, his hand finding the thick fur at my neck, and I felt power flow from him into me. Not forcing the shift, but guiding it, showing my wolf how to recede without fear. The transformation back was gentler this time, my bones reforming, my body shrinking. When it was done, I stood on human legs again, naked except for the ashes of the white shift that had burned away, and Astwood was there, wrapping his own cloak around me before I could even process my vulnerability. Our eyes met, and I felt something click into place. Not just recognition, but completion. As if some part of me had been missing my entire life and had finally, impossibly, come home. Chapter 7. Astwood's cloak smelled like winter forests and something wild I couldn't name, and I pulled it tighter around myself as the reality of what had just happened crashed over me in waves. I wasn't dead. The fire hadn't killed me. My wolf had finally emerged, and a Lycan King, a creature I'd thought existed only in old stories, was standing in front of me claiming I was innocent. Around us, the clearing had gone silent except for the crackling of flames still burning on the pyre behind me. Every eye was fixed on Astwood and me, on the way he stood so close, the way his hand lingered on my shoulder as if he had every right to touch me. "You can't just take her," Alara finally said, though her voice had lost its earlier certainty. "Pack law?" "Pack law is superseded by Lycan law," Astwood interrupted, his tone allowing no argument. "Which you would know if your pack hadn't spent the last century pretending the old bloodlines no longer exist." He gestured to his men, who'd efficiently subdued the few Silverpaw warriors who'd attempted resistance. "Arya Ashford is under my protection now. Any who wish to challenge that claim may do so through formal trial by combat." No one moved. Even Alara, for all her earlier bluster, knew better than to challenge a Lycan King in single combat. I saw her calculating, trying to find some angle, some way to salvage her authority. "What interest could a king possibly have in a cursed half-breed?" she asked, and the venom in her voice made me flinch. "She's wolfless, powerless. She only shifted because of whatever dark magic she invoked with that fire." "She shifted," Astwood said coldly, "because she's pure-blooded Lycan. The last daughter of the Ashford line, which your pack has apparently been hiding for 22 years. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. I felt it echo through me too, because it couldn't be true. My father had been pack, not Lycan, My mother had died when I was young, but she'd been pack too. Hadn't she? You're lying, Alara said, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Thomas Ashford was beta of this pack. His mate was pack-born. There's no Lycan blood in their daughter. Astwood smiled, and it was a predator's expression. Thomas Ashford was Lycan, hiding among you to protect his mate and child from those who would have killed them for their bloodline. When he died, that protection died with him, which is why she, he nodded toward me, has spent the last 3 years suppressed, unable to shift, her true nature locked away by fear and grief. I remembered my father's death then, the border skirmish that had taken him, the way his body had been so mangled we could barely recognize him, the way Alara had rushed the funeral, claimed it was pack tradition to burn the dead within a day. What if it had been murder, not accident? What if she'd known what he was and killed him for it? The thoughts spiraled through my mind faster than I could process them. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice sounding small and lost. If I'm Lycan, why didn't my father tell me? Why didn't he teach me? Because Lycan abilities manifest differently, Astwood explained, his voice gentling when he spoke to me. Your wolf couldn't emerge until you accepted your power, until you stopped fighting what you are. He gestured to the flames still burning behind me. Fire is the Ashford gift. Your grandmother wielded it. Your father could have, if he'd chosen to. And now you... He trailed off, silver eyes studying my face with an intensity that made my skin flush. Now you're the last of your line, which makes you incredibly valuable and incredibly vulnerable. Before I could respond, Caspian pushed through the crowd. He looked between Astwood and me, his face ravaged with guilt and confusion. Arya, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this. If I'd known you were Lycan, if I'd known father... He stopped, unable to finish. I wanted to hate him for holding that torch, for choosing the pack over me. But looking at his devastated expression, I could only feel hollow and tired. You made your choice, I said quietly. When it mattered most, you chose them over me. I'm sorry, he whispered. Please, Arya. You're all I have left. No, I interrupted, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I'm not yours anymore. I'm not this pack's. I don't know what I am, but I know I don't belong here. Astwood's hand found mine, his fingers warm and steady, and I felt strength flow from that simple touch. You belong with your own kind, he said, with the Lycans who've been searching for you since your father's death. Something in his tone made me look up sharply. Searching for me? I asked. Why? Because, Astwood said, his silver eyes holding mine with an intensity that stole my breath. You're not just the last Ashford. You're fated to be Lycan Queen. My mate. The world tilted. Around us I heard gasps, shocked murmurs, Alara's sharp intake of breath. But I could only stare at Astwood, at the certainty in his expression, the way he looked at me like I was something precious he'd been seeking his entire life. That's impossible, I managed. I'm nobody. I'm just... You're everything, he interrupted softly. The bond recognized you the moment I scented you from the forest. My wolf has been clawing at my control since I arrived, demanding I claim you, protect you, take you home. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I've waited 30 years to find my mate. I'm not letting you go now. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Hours ago, I'd been about to burn to death, abandoned by everyone I'd ever known. Now a king was claiming me as his destined mate. But another part of me, the part that was newly awakened wolf and ancient Lycan power, recognized the truth in his words. I could feel it in my blood, in the way my wolf preened under his attention, in the rightness of his hand holding mine. I don't even know you, I said, but it sounded weak even to my own ears. You will, Astwood promised. I'll give you time to understand, to accept what you are and what we can be together. But first, we need to leave this place. Your former pack," he said the words with distaste, "is no longer safe for you." He was right. I could feel the hostility radiating from Alara, the confusion and fear from the others. Even those who might have believed in my innocence now looked at me like I was something other, something dangerous. Only Caspian still looked at me with recognition, but it was the recognition of someone watching a stranger wear a familiar face. "I'll come with you," I said, the decision feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "Good." Astwood's smile transformed his stern features, making him almost unbearably handsome. "Then let's go home, Arya Ashford. Let me show you the world your father fled from, and the throne that's been waiting for you to claim it." Chapter 8. The journey north took 3 days, and with each mile we traveled from Silverpaw territory, I felt the chains that had bound me my entire life falling away. Astwood's pack, or rather his court, as he corrected me, traveled with military efficiency, their wolves larger and stronger than any I'd seen before. They treated me with careful respect, calling me my lady, and bowing their heads when they passed. It was surreal and uncomfortable, and secretly thrilling all at once. Astwood rode beside me, sometimes in wolf form, sometimes human, always watchful. He didn't push me to talk, seemed content just to have me near, but I caught him watching me with an intensity that made my skin flush, and my newly awakened wolf purr with satisfaction. On the second night, we camped in a clearing beside a river that ran silver in the moonlight. I sat apart from the others, still uncertain of my place among them, when Astwood approached and settled beside me on the riverbank. "You're thinking too loudly," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I can practically hear the questions spinning through your mind." I glanced at him sidelong. In the moonlight, he looked almost otherworldly. Sharp features, silver eyes that seemed to glow with internal light, power radiating from him like heat from a flame. "I have about 1,000 questions," I admitted. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with the one that scares you most," he suggested. I hesitated, then decided honesty was better than pretense. "Why me?" I asked quietly. "You're a king. You could have any woman you wanted. Why claim someone like me as your mate?" "Someone like you," Astwood repeated, his voice carrying an edge. "You mean someone who was nearly murdered by her own pack? Someone who's just discovered she's the last of an ancient bloodline? Or someone who can command fire and survived her own execution?" "Someone broken," I said simply. "I spent 22 years being told I was cursed, worthless, less than nothing. You can't just say I'm your fated mate and expect me to believe I'm suddenly worthy of being a queen." Astwood was quiet for a long moment, watching the moonlight dance on the water. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but fierce. "The bond doesn't lie, Arya. It doesn't make mistakes. When I scented you in those flames, when I saw you shift for the first time, my wolf recognized its other half. Not because you're perfect, or because you've had an easy life, but because your soul fits mine like 2 pieces of a broken whole." He turned to face me fully, his silver eyes intense. "You think you're broken? I've spent 30 years fighting wars, making impossible decisions, carrying the weight of an entire civilization on my shoulders. I'm scarred inside and out. But when I look at you, I don't see someone damaged. I see someone who survived hell and came out stronger. Someone whose fire burns bright enough to light up the darkness I've been living in." His words wrapped around something fragile inside me, something that wanted desperately to believe him. "I don't know how to be what you need," I whispered. "I don't know how to be a queen or a mate or anything other than what I've always been." "Then we'll figure it out together," Astwood said. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The simple touch sent electricity racing down my spine. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Arya. I'm asking you to give us a chance." Before I could respond, one of his men approached and bowed. "My lord, the scouts have returned. They've found something you should see." Astwood's expression shifted instantly from gentle to commanding. What did they find? Survivors, my lord. From the Silverpaw Pack's sickness. They followed us. He glanced at me uncomfortably. They're asking for the lady. My heart clenched. Who? I asked. How many? 7 of them, my lady, including a young male who claims to be your brother. Caspian. He'd followed me. Part of me wanted to refuse to see him, to let him suffer the way he'd made me suffer. But a larger part, the part that remembered raising him, teaching him, loving him, couldn't turn him away. I'll see them, I said, standing. Alone. Astwood rose beside me, his hand finding the small of my back in a possessive gesture that should have annoyed me, but instead made me feel protected. Not alone, he said firmly. I won't risk your safety. They're sick and desperate, I argued. Not dangerous. They tried to burn you alive 3 days ago, Astwood reminded me, his voice hard. Forgive me if I don't trust their good intentions. He was right, but I needed to do this. Needed to face Caspian and the others who'd survived the poisoning that had been used to frame me. Please, I said, meeting his eyes. Let me try to help them. I'm a healer. It's what I was raised to be, even if everything else about my life was a lie. Something in my expression must have convinced him because he nodded reluctantly. I'll be close, he said. If anything feels wrong, call for me. The survivors looked worse than I'd expected, their skin still bearing traces of the black discoloration, their breathing labored. They'd traveled hard to catch up with us, and it showed in their exhausted faces and desperate eyes. Caspian stood at their front, and when he saw me, he fell to his knees. Arya, he said, his voice breaking, please. I know I don't deserve your help after what I did, but they're dying. 3 more died on the journey here. If we don't find a cure soon. He trailed off, tears streaming down his face. I looked at the others, people I'd known my whole life, who'd watched me burn without protest, who'd believed the worst of me without question. I should have felt satisfaction at their suffering, should have turned away and let them face the consequences of their choices. But I couldn't, because despite everything, I was still a healer. And my fire had protected me for a reason. I'll help you, I said quietly, but not because you deserve it, because it's the right thing to do. I knelt beside the nearest survivor, an older woman named Sarah, who'd always been kind to me in her quiet way, and placed my hands on her chest. I could feel the poison burning through her veins like acid, could sense it eating away at her from the inside. But I could also feel my new power, the Lycan fire that had saved me from the pyre. What if it could save them too? I closed my eyes and let the heat build in my palms, but not the destructive fire that had surrounded me before. This was different, cleansing, purifying warmth that sank into Sarah's chest and sought out the poison. I heard her gasp, felt her body arch beneath my hands, but I didn't stop. The fire inside me knew what to do, burning away the sickness while leaving healthy tissue untouched. When I opened my eyes, the black veins on Sarah's skin had faded. Her breathing came easier. She stared at me with wonder and fear in equal measure. You saved me, she whispered. How? The same power you tried to burn me for, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. The gift you called a curse. I moved to the next survivor, and the next, burning the poison from their bodies until my own hands shook with exhaustion. Astwood appeared beside me when I swayed, catching me before I fell. Enough, he said firmly. You've done enough. But there was one more. Caspian knelt before me, and I could see the sickness in him too, fainter than the others, but still there. Please, he said. I don't deserve it, but please. I looked at my brother, my former brother really, since I no longer belonged to his pack or his world. I could let the poison take him, could watch him die the way he'd watched me burn. but looking into his eyes, I saw only the little boy I'd raised, the child who'd clung to me after our mother died, who'd needed me when our father was too lost in grief to be a parent. "You held the torch," I said quietly. "When it mattered most, you chose their lies over my truth." "I know," Caspian said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life. But you're still my sister, Arya. Even if you never forgive me, even if I never see you again after tonight, you're still my sister." The words broke something inside me. I placed my hands on his chest and let the fire flow, burning away the poison one last time. When I finished, Astwood caught me as my legs gave out, lifting me easily into his arms. "We're done here," he announced to the survivors. "You've been healed. Now leave, and count yourselves lucky that my mate has a kinder heart than you deserve." As he carried me back to our camp, I looked over his shoulder at Caspian's retreating form. He glanced back once, and our eyes met. I saw gratitude there, and sorrow, and the knowledge that something between us had been irreparably broken. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked Astwood quietly. "Does it matter?" he replied. "You did what your heart demanded. That's all any of us can do." He was right, and as we left the survivors behind, I realized I wasn't just leaving them. I was leaving my old life, my old self, the girl who'd spent 22 years trying to be small enough that no one would notice her power. That girl had died in the flames. The woman who'd emerged was someone new, someone who would never apologize for her fire again. Chapter 9. The Lycan stronghold appeared on the 4th day like something from a dream. It wasn't a castle in the traditional sense, but rather a massive structure carved directly into the mountainside, its walls formed from ancient stone that seemed to pulse with dormant power. Waterfalls cascaded down the cliffs on either side, and forests thick with old-growth trees surrounded it like a protective barrier. "Home," Astwood said simply, and I heard pride in his voice. The heart of Lycan territory. The last stronghold that stood unbroken since before the pack systems were established. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, and as we approached, I felt my wolf stir with recognition. This place sang to something deep in my blood, something that remembered, even if I didn't. The Lycans who lived here were different from pack wolves. I could see it immediately in the way they carried themselves, the power that radiated from even the youngest among them. They gathered to watch our arrival, and when Astwood announced me as the lost Ashford heir and his fated mate, the response was overwhelming. Some bowed, some stared in shock, and some, mostly the unmated females, looked at me with open hostility. "They don't accept me," I murmured to Astwood as we walked through the great hall. "They will," he said confidently. "Once they see your power, once they understand what you are." "What if I don't understand what I am?" I interrupted. "You keep talking about my bloodline and my gifts like they're facts, but I don't feel like a queen. I feel like a fraud pretending to be something she's not." Astwood stopped walking and turned to face me fully, his hands cupping my face with surprising gentleness. "Listen to me, Arya. Your father fled this place to protect you and your mother from those who would have used your power for their own ends. He spent your entire life teaching you to hide, to suppress, to make yourself small. But you're not small. You never were. And I'm not asking you to become something you're not. I'm asking you to finally become who you've always been meant to be." Before I could respond, a woman approached us. She was stunning, tall and elegant with silver blonde hair and amber eyes that assessed me coldly. "So, this is the lost Ashford," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's smaller than I expected. Are you certain the bond isn't mistaken?" "Morgana," Astwood said, his voice carrying a warning. "This is Arya, my mate and your future queen. You will show her the respect her position demands." Morgana's smile was sharp as glass. "Of course, my lord. Forgive my surprise. It's just that we'd all assumed you'd choose a mate from among the established Lycan families. Someone trained in court politics and royal protocol. Someone who wasn't raised by pack wolves, like a common servant." The insult was deliberate, and I felt anger flare hot in my chest. Before I could speak, Astwood stepped between us. "Leave us," he commanded. "Now." Morgana bowed mockingly and retreated, but I could feel her eyes on me as she went, could sense the calculation in her gaze. She wasn't just a jealous rival. She was dangerous. "Who is she?" I asked once we were alone. "Someone I should have dealt with long ago," Astwood said grimly. "She's from one of the oldest Lycan families, and she's been angling to become queen since we were children. The bond should have ended her ambitions, but clearly she's not accepting reality." He took my hands, his expression earnest. "I need you to be careful around her, Arya. Morgana is cunning and ruthless. She'll do anything to undermine you." "Then why keep her here?" I asked. "Why not banish her?" "Because her family controls the southern territories," Astwood explained. "Banishing her would risk civil war. For now, we have to play the political game. But I promise you, I won't let her hurt you." That night, I was given chambers befitting a queen. Vast rooms with soaring ceilings, windows that overlooked the valley, and a bed large enough for 3 people. It was more luxury than I'd ever experienced, and it felt wrong somehow, like I was wearing someone else's clothes. I was standing at the window, watching the moon rise over the mountains, when a knock sounded at my door. "Come in," I called, expecting a servant. Instead, Astwood entered, and my breath caught. He'd changed from his traveling clothes into the formal attire of a Lycan King, dark leather and silver clasps, his hair pulled back to reveal the sharp lines of his face. He looked every inch the powerful ruler, and I was suddenly aware of my own plain dress and unbound hair. "You're beautiful," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You don't need silks and jewels to be magnificent." Heat flooded my cheeks. "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite my racing heart. "Because tomorrow I have to present you to the court formally," Astwood said. "There will be questions about your bloodline, tests of your power, challenges from those who doubt your legitimacy. I wanted to prepare you." "Tests?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "What kind of tests?" "Nothing you can't handle," he assured me, crossing the room to stand close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "But you'll need to demonstrate your fire, prove that you carry the Ashford gift. Can you control it? Can you summon it at will?" I thought about the flames that had surrounded me on the pyre, the healing fire I'd used to cure the survivors. Both times, the power had come from desperation or need. I had no idea if I could call it deliberately. "I don't know," I admitted. "Show me," Astwood said softly. He took my hand and led me to the center of the room, then stepped back. "Close your eyes. Feel the heat inside you, the power that's always been there. Don't force it. Just let it rise." I did as he instructed, reaching for that warmth in my chest. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, I felt it begin to build. A gentle heat that spread through my veins like honey. When I opened my eyes, small flames danced across my fingertips, casting golden light across the room. "Beautiful," Astwood breathed, and I realized he was looking at my face, not the fire. "You're learning to control it already." The flames grew brighter, responding to his praise, to the bond humming between us. I looked up at him and saw desire burning in his silver eyes, saw the way his hands clenched at his sides, as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching for me. "Astwood," I whispered, not even sure what I was asking for. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands cupping my face with aching gentleness, despite the raw hunger in his expression. "Tell me to leave," he said roughly. "Tell me it's too soon, that you need more time, and I'll go. But if you don't—" He didn't finish, but I understood. The bond was pulling at both of us, demanding completion, demanding we claim each other fully. I should have told him to leave, should have insisted I needed time to adjust, to understand my new life before adding the complexity of a mating bond. But standing there with flames dancing between us and his hands warm against my skin, I realized I didn't want time. I wanted him. "Stay," I breathed, and his control shattered. His mouth found mine in a kiss that was both desperate and reverent, his hands tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. I gasped against his lips, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until I forgot how to breathe, forgot everything except the feeling of his body against mine and the rightness of being in his arms. The flames around my hands flared brighter, spreading to engulf us both in a cocoon of golden fire that didn't burn, only warmed. Astwood pulled back just far enough to look into my eyes, his expression fierce and tender all at once. "Mine," he growled, and it wasn't a question. "Yours," I agreed, the word feeling like a vow. "And you're mine." "Always," he promised. And as he claimed my mouth again, as the bond between us snapped into place with an almost physical click, I felt the last pieces of my broken past fall away. I wasn't the cursed girl anymore. I wasn't the rejected daughter or the nearly murdered witch. I was Arya Ashford, Lycan heir, fated mate to a king. And I was finally, impossibly, home. Chapter 10. The formal presentation to the court came with dawn, and I stood before the assembled Lycans wearing a gown of deep red that Astwood had chosen, the color of fire and blood and power. My hair had been arranged in elaborate braids woven with silver thread, and I wore a circlet that marked me as the king's intended mate. I looked like a queen. I just had to convince them I could be one. The great hall was filled to capacity, Lycans from all the territories gathered to witness this moment. I could feel their eyes on me, some curious, some hopeful, and many skeptical. At the front stood Morgana, her expression carefully neutral, but I caught the flash of hatred in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Astwood stood beside his throne, power radiating from him like heat from the sun. When I entered, he extended his hand to me, and I took it, feeling strength flow from that simple contact. "Lycans of the Northlands," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the massive hall. "I present to you Arya Ashford, daughter of Thomas Ashford, and heir to the ancient bloodline. She is my fated mate, and she will be your queen." The response was mixed, some voices raised in celebration, others in protest. An older male stepped forward from the crowd, his silver hair marking him as an elder. "We mean no disrespect, my lord," he said carefully, "but the girl was raised by pack wolves, away from our ways. How can we be certain she carries the true Lycan bloodline? How do we know this isn't some elaborate deception?" "You dare question my word?" Astwood's voice dropped dangerously low. "I dare question unusual circumstances," the elder replied, though he bowed his head respectfully. The Ashford line was thought extinct. Now suddenly a girl appears claiming that heritage, conveniently your fated mate. Surely you can understand our caution. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I felt Astwood tense beside me, felt his wolf rising to defend me, but I placed my hand on his arm. "It's all right," I said softly. Then, louder, addressing the crowd, "The elder is right to question. I would question too, in his place." I stepped forward away from Astwood's protective presence, standing alone before hundreds of Lycans who might reject me. "I can't prove my parentage through bloodlines or documents. My father fled this place before I was born, and he never told me what I was. But I can prove my power." I closed my eyes and reached for the fire inside me, the gift that had protected me from the pyre, that had healed the sick, that had always been there waiting for me to accept it. The flames came easier this time, rising from my palms in spiraling ribbons of gold and crimson. I let them grow, expanding until fire surrounded me like wings, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. Gasps echoed through the hall. The fire obeyed my will, shaping itself into forms. Wolves running, phoenixes rising, ancient symbols that I somehow knew, despite never having learned them. This was the Ashford gift in its full glory, the power that had made my bloodline legendary. "I am Arya Ashford," I declared, my voice ringing with newfound confidence. "I carry the fire of my ancestors. I survived my own execution because this power protected me. and I claim my place among you, not because of who my father was, but because of who I choose to be." The flames condensed, swirling around me one last time before I absorbed them back into my body. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the older Lycans began to bow. The younger ones followed until the entire assembly had acknowledged me. All except Morgana, who stood rigid, her face twisted with barely suppressed rage. "This isn't over," she hissed as she passed me on her way out, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You may have fooled them with your parlor tricks, but I know what you really are. A pretender wearing a crown that should be mine. Then challenge me properly," I said, meeting her eyes without flinching. "In front of the court, where everyone can witness. Stop skulking in shadows and face me openly if you dare." Morgana's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with calculation. She hadn't expected me to call her out so directly. "Perhaps I will," she said softly. "But be careful what you wish for, little packwolf. Some challenges are fought to the death." She swept from the hall, and I felt Astwood's hand on my shoulder. "You didn't have to antagonize her," he said, though I heard approval in his voice. "She would have come for me anyway," I replied. "At least this way, I get to choose the battlefield." The coronation ceremony took place that evening under the full moon. Ancient words were spoken, oaths were sworn, and a crown of silver and moonstone was placed on my head. When Astwood took my hand and claimed me as his mate before all the assembled Lycans, the bond between us blazed so bright I thought everyone must be able to see it glowing. "My queen," he murmured as we stood together on the balcony overlooking the valley, the celebration continuing in the halls behind us. "My heart," I replied, using his earlier endearment, and watched his eyes darken with desire. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Because if you're not, if any of this is too much too fast, tell me. I'll slow down, I silenced him with a kiss, pouring all my answer into that gesture. When we parted, both breathless, I smiled up at him. 3 weeks ago, I was being burned alive by people who called me cursed, I said. Today, I'm a queen with power. I'm still learning to control, mated to a king who looks at me like I'm precious. Am I happy? I'm terrified and overwhelmed and uncertain about 1,000 things. But yes, Astwood, I'm happy. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me with possessive tenderness. I'll spend every day for the rest of our lives making sure you never regret choosing this. Choosing me. I didn't choose you, I corrected, looking up at him with a smile. Fate chose you. The bond chose you. My wolf chose you before my conscious mind even understood what was happening. I placed my hand over his heart. But I'm choosing to stay. To fight for this. To become the queen your people need and the mate you deserve. You already are, Astwood said fiercely. Don't you see it, Arya? You faced down a hostile court, offered challenge to your rival, accepted a crown and a responsibility you never asked for. You've been a queen from the moment you stepped into those flames and refused to burn. Later that night, lying in our shared chambers with Astwood's steady breathing beside me, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The years of feeling cursed and broken. The betrayal by those I'd loved. The flames that should have killed me, but instead revealed my true nature. Part of me would always carry those scars, would always remember what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was Arya Ashford, Lycan Queen, mate to a king, heir to fire and power. And this was only the beginning. Outside our window, the moon hung full and bright, casting silver light across the mountains. Somewhere in those mountains, Morgana was plotting. Somewhere in the distant south, my former pack was dealing with the consequences of their choices. And somewhere deep in my blood, ancient power stirred, waiting to be fully awakened. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow, I would have to learn to truly rule, to wield my power with wisdom, to prove myself worthy of the crown I wore. But tonight, I was safe in the arms of my mate, surrounded by the home I'd never known I'd lost, embraced by a destiny I was only beginning to understand. The pack had tried to burn me alive. Instead, they'd forged me in flames, tempering me into something stronger than they could have imagined. I'd survived my execution and claimed a throne, and I was done apologizing for my fire. The end.